Hello, listeners. We are back on Quote Unquote with KK. This is our second episode of season 2021. Um, we have had the longest presidential election in the world still going on, and we have a new president in the United States of America. A lot of narrative around what's going to happen in the future is being talked about, and particularly from the Indian diaspora in the US. How is the Biden and Kamala Harris duo really going to look towards the Indo-US geopolitics and investments and trade in the next 4 years to come in their tenure? I have invited Sridhar Chityala. Sridhar is a partner at Elevate Innovation Partners, and over his 30 years of experience, Sridhar has worked into financial services such as JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Wachovia, Wells Fargo, Tectron, National Australia Bank, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and he has been an investor, board member, advisor to several fintech firms on product innovation, and also been associated with several emerging technologies and financial services business, both in the US and in India and across APAC. And she does a list of achievements and the positions that he has held, both in his personal capacity and in his industry advisory capacity, runs very long. I'm really glad to have Sridhar on today's podcast. So welcome, Sridhar, on today's podcast, World in Biden Era, Indo-US Geopolitics and Investments.
Great. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, KKG, and so happy to be part of this great initiative that you are involved in. And it was wonderful to hear the strategic context and the rationale with which how you started this effort and how it has now progressed into a very big, large, mammoth, advocacy and awareness type of a program that you are engaged in. So very happy to be here, to be talking on a very interesting topic on the threshold of the just concluded US elections.
Excellent. So Sridhar, let me just start talking about, what is the whole speculation? How would the Democrats, given their majority and the thin margin that they have in Washington, and President Joe Biden, really going to manage the politics and the political agenda in the US? And does he face headwinds in the US as far as we are concerned to be able to take some very tough decisions coming out of the whole COVID new normal?
Well, I think given he has now controls the three branches of the government, albeit with small majority, presidential, the Senate and the House, he clearly now has the mandate, albeit, bringing in as needed Kamala Harris to cast the decisive vote in the Senate. He has an advantage to get ahead with his agenda. The question, therefore, is how he balances that and be able to swing some of the Republicans to buy into the agenda is an interesting kind of proposition that we were all waiting. But he does have the mandate, and he does have the, albeit very thin, and he does, as you say, the votes in the House to get his agenda through.
Excellent. My follow-on question is, how strong a president would he be given the issues at home to be able to repair some of the damages from the previous Trump administration has done to the world and the unity around the world, whether it is, counterterrorism, climate change, defense. Do you think Biden would be a strong president who can, first, he has a big repair job to repair the country, which is divided into two, and what we have seen at the Capitol. So he has a big task on hand to first focus on the country itself, then focus internationally in moving forward with all the agendas and issues that the Trump administration left behind.
Well, I think first and foremost, I don't know whether Trump left behind a whole raft of global issues. It was a very different policy from the perspective of the prior years or the prior presidencies. Trump was a much more assertive president. There's a lot that was accomplished in 4 years of time under the Trump presidency. He clearly, matched his rhetoric with actions. The formation, the Asia word name Asia Pacific changed to Indo-Pacific. There was question mark whether that would change, but now that is continuing, the Indo-Pacific. Then the question came up, which is Quad, which is the quadrilateral strategy for security, trade, and energy, which formed the epicenter. And then that further led to the whole construct of the 2+2 dialogue between India and United States, or between India and Japan, which furthered. And then a much broader strategic partnership as a defense deterrent in the Indo-Pacific, extending all the way into the Indian Ocean. But more specifically, the South China incursions, which to some extent was quietened. And then, of course, the West Asia-Israel peace accord that was never achieved by any past president, all reflects, in one's view, a very constructive approach in terms of avoiding wars, but at the same time putting, if you have to use Ajit Doval's words, it is defensive offense. So there was strategic defense in terms of the perspective in place. And no war occurred under his watch, which is very unusual when you look at the past 4 presidents. So therefore, he left behind a very different kind of a philosophy, and his single-minded focus was around 4 important, verticals or vertices: China, the threat of Iran, North Korea, and some of the issues around the Indo-China border. These were the 4 major themes that Trump was actively engaged in as a strategic player. He kept North Korea quiet. He kept Iranians relatively quiet. And there was constant skirmishes, but it was to make sure that there was no further losses in South China Sea. And India stood by United States under the Trump presidency in the confrontation that is still looming in the Himalayan region between India and China. So contrary to that, Biden's policy would be there is an expectation they would be far more conciliatory to China. What does that mean? We don't know as yet. Does he mean that there is going to be free hand given to China to do what it needed to do? In my humble view, which I have stood in public and made this comment, much of the South China issues that loomed during the Obama-Biden era. Okay, so from almost nowhere to the entire what you call as the 8-point line, dotted line, the China Philippines in the Scarborough Shoals dispute, which was resolved in favor of Philippines by ICJ, which China never kind of adhered to. The Spratly Islands becoming a kind of a strategic military deployment, expanding during that period. So all these kind of things have simmered on. To some extent, there was, to a large extent, not some extent, but a large extent that remained a background issue, but a frontline paper with the issues that have propped up, even including Tibet. So what we're going to witness is actually yesterday, the Chinese senior officials have made a statement. The strategic misunderstanding or mismanagement of China relationship must be corrected. The Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the Uyghur issue should not be brought up. It is an internal matter, is what we are hearing from the Chinese side. So, to answer your question, there's going to be a fundamental shift. To what extent it is going to be, how much it is going to shift remains to be seen on the security side and the rhetoric of the dialogue between all the nations.
Excellent. I just wanted to also focus, Trump had decided to, during the COVID, move out of the WHO and not sponsor the organization. I'm hearing that the US is going to go back and rejoin the WHO as one of the key sponsors.
Correct.
So that's what I was alluding to in my previous question.
No, I'll answer that question, which is
even where on the Defense Council, India was proposed as a permanent member. Now there seems to be again statements where this is now getting diluted by the Biden administration. So things like these, is Biden going to be, as you mentioned, a very, very headstrong leader like Trump, who says and who does, as you mentioned, or is he going to, as you mentioned, going to be soft pedaling and going to be very conciliatory in his approach to all these issues that the previous administration has left unfinished, I would say?
Well, let me go on the philosophical side. Trump believed that these institutions were irrelevant and were not contributing and politically compromised. So he had a firm belief, and there was no economic value generated for the money that United States was investing either into United Nations or into WHO or into Paris Accord or into Green Program or into even IMF, World Bank type of organizations. They were created post-World War II. They have not reformed themselves. And it is still an old man's club or old boys club, and so therefore it was redundant. That's his kind of strategic and philosophical and policy perspective. So Biden is very clear. He says we will be joining WHO. We'll be working with WHO to find the common ground for tackling COVID pandemic around the world, sharing knowledge, practices, etc. So WHO, United States is going to be back. United Nations, they've already appointed the ambassador for UN. Susan Rice was the previous one, and then Nikki Haley, and then from Republican side, and then now we're going to have Taylor Thomas. So we're going to have somebody coming in. And they believe in United Nations as a forum and an institution to believe in the disputes. So therefore, Biden is very clear, they'll be back in UN. Biden is equally clear, he will be rejoining the Paris Accord and committing $450 billion, which we all kind of sit back and stand up or whatever you want to call and say, oh my God, what are we going to get out of this? Okay, so therefore, he's joining Paris Accord.
Correct.
Okay, and Trump's view is that most of the puffing is happening from China and India. I was asked to comment on this Indian side. I said, look, he can make his comments, but the story is at the end of the day, you look at the numbers, but the numbers, India seems to be moving well towards achieving its goal, but it doesn't discount the fact there's still challenges in India. So his belief is that he will join the Paris Accord. And the last but not the least, that you asked a question about UN Security Council permanent membership.
Correct.
Trump was emphatic that India has to be India. He doesn't believe that India has to be in P5, but because he didn't feel it is relevant, but he certainly supported India, Japan, and Germany or France. I'm sorry, India, Japan, and Germany to people, in the UNSC, United Nations Security Council. He also wanted India to be in G7 as a G8 member. Until
Correct.
the election transitioned, Boris Johnson had invited India to the India, Russia, and I think India. He had invited three countries. Japan,
G5.
Japan,
Yeah.
India, Brazil, and Germany. Or he had invited three specific countries. Okay, I remember India very clearly. Was one of the people to be at the table. All right.
Right.
Now, that may not be the case right now because Boris has not extended the invitation to Prime Minister Modi. These are the political differences. And in terms of the UN, this question was asked whether India, whether there would be whether India's the continued support. There was indications in the Obama-Biden administration for India to be in the UN as as a permanent member, right? UN Security Council permanent member. But there seems to be a slightly slipping trend right now, which says that it needs to reconsider and it needs to look at the input and the views of Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, Brazil, and so on and so forth, or Mexico. If you can, they have thrown few casts in
and buts.
And so to me, actually, I'll be very candid. I mean, United India being in P5 in a strategic context, this is my purely a personal view, is irrelevant. India being a key member of continued extension and provision of Quad, which is very relevant to the region. India and Japan continuing to lead that effort is far more important than P5. Okay, so now these days, nobody works to sanctions. Okay, nobody works to sanctions. Iran has violated sanctions, has enriched its uranium, and is now almost days or months or weeks away from having nuclear material. It has constantly flouting and violating the norms of the oil. And Biden wants to go back to the Iran accord that was signed. And Israel has stated, no way you're going back to that accord, and we're not going to keep quiet, and we're not going to allow Iran to be a nuclear power. So there are these policy discussions and items that are coming up. If you listen to Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, if you listen to him, he says India is pivotal and in India is important, and we need to this is his recent statement. India has, India and China and India, Japan, US have to change the narrative as to how they combat China. If you listen to Janet or Tom or Kurt, or if you listen to Anthony Blinken, Kurt Campbell is going to be the overall Asian coordinator. He's a veteran diplomat, very well known to the Japanese. And of course, Dr. Jaishankar has worked, he's a career diplomat. He has relationship with a number of people on both sides of the aisle. He has worked with many of these people, both as an ambassador, so he's well aware of the Chinese. So it's not something that is new for Dr. Jaishankar to deal with these issues. And Prime Minister Modi himself has stated, you need strategic flexibility in dealing with the foreign policy issues. I mean, when I look at the US side, US is much more going to balance the traditional Democratic Party relationships that exist around the world. Is Pakistan, China and Iran, and I know they have had a very mixed relationship with North Korea. It remains to be seen what happens there, but certainly they want to re-sign the Russia Accord, which is expiring this month. So I think that's going to be done. START treaty will be renewed, and then they were also looking at the nuclear. So I think it's a very different approach that one will see. Whereas Trump will upfront say these are stakes on the ground as far as US is concerned. Biden administration is going to say, okay, we have had a past relationship and we know this stuff and we know the issues and how we kind of work together. So you're going to see much more dialogue and there could be reshaping of the relationships. There are four major issues that Biden is confronted with right now. and how he's going to deal with it will shape the overall foreign policy of Biden administration. The Myanmar coup is number one.
Correct.
South China, now China has sent its survey ships into the territories of the contested nations, right? And the same China, it has also expressed its willingness to send more planes into Taiwan as an imminent threat. So how he deals with that remains a question. The Iran is going to be another big issue in the hands of Biden. And then, of course, Tibet. There is in the stimulus package, $1.2 billion of aid is set aside for the Tibetans in terms of the self-governance and Lama and so on. That's a substantive amount. So this is what the challenges that he faces. We have no idea how these decisions are going to be handled and made and what that means to the future next 4 years of Biden's foreign policy.
I mean, well put, laying down the whole landscape, Sridhar, really appreciate. I want to shift a little bit gears towards India. I think in the whole presidential team, this presidential team as the highest number of Indians working for the White House ever. Is that true? And if that's true, how can the Indian diaspora really swing things for India? What do you think about it?
Well, it's very interesting because, numbers don't necessarily mean things work in your favor. It is a well-known fact. Vast number of Indian Americans are, have a Democratic affinity, and Republicans tried to change the course and to bring more and more Indian Americans into the diaspora. Modi played a big role. The Trump-Modi bondage played a big role.
Correct.
If I have to say, if Trump contests an election to be the president of India, he will win probably hands down by a vast majority.
Right.
Because Indians love his style of leadership. Which is, take the bull by its horn and shake it. So therefore, you will begin to see, there's a lot of support for him to kind of come back. Look, we have had three major issues with regard to India. Okay, one issue is this, CAA, Article 370, repealing of the Article 370, Citizenship Amendment Act. Article 35A, National Register of Citizens, which is not the business of United States. Okay, but they have been passing councils after councils. About 7 councils have passed resolutions, all controlled by Democrats, against the policies of this, which they call discriminatory, without complete lack of understanding. Even they put their foot in the mouth on the recently ongoing farmers' agitation. Correct. And you see banners and posters in West Coast and some parts of America, which is around the farmers' agitation, which is a reflection of more political activism rather than economic reality. Okay? And vast parts of it comes from the Democratic side, without kind of mincing words. It was also the Quad, led by Pramila Jayapal, Kamala Harris, Ilman, Rashida, and so on, who said they need to summon Dr. Jaishankar to the House to be questioned around human rights violations. When you had major issues in India during the February visit, Shaheen Bagh, when he was asked a question, he said, Modi is the Prime Minister of India. It's an internal matter. They will know how to handle the situation.
Correct.
Modi should not be advising me if I have communal riots in United States, whether I'm competent enough to handle it. But that is the philosophical difference between the two parties. So these guys are going to bring up. So whether you have 20 Indians or 40 Indians in the administration, if the philosophical mindset is to because of we have lobby groups, we have activism groups, etc. And when you have these asymmetric issues, okay, if you have human rights issues, why your China is a strategic partner? You mean there are no human rights issues in China?
Right.
And I mean there are no human rights issues in Pakistan? There are no human rights issues in Iran? There's no human rights issues in some of the African countries? Why is it that Democrats or Democratic Party have a specific flavor towards India, notwithstanding the fact India today under Trump has become the 8th largest trading partner of United States, and United States is India's largest trading partner, displacing China. We have had a 20%, India has had 20% contraction or 25% contraction in volume of trade with China, whereas it has almost doubled when you add the energy,
Correct.
which made up the bulk of 39-40 million barrels. At one point of time, United States was to be used as a strategic reserve, but now I think India says it has alternate options. And India is the largest today exporter of students to United States,
Correct.
close to 200,000 and $8 billion in volume.
Correct.
So therefore, all this happened, which sometimes the Democrats don't agree, but all this happened under Trump. Right. And vast seeds of it occurred during Obama-Biden. So if you take a look at these numbers and the philosophical shift, it's very hard, unless you see some action and traction over the next 4 years, whether 20 or 40 is going to be material. But there's a precedence of some of the issues that has occurred within the democratic controlled local councils, which doesn't augur well if these issues are presented front and center of India-US relationship.
Very well said. So we just pick up a little bit on further on the trade before we go to the student and immigration and visa and whatnot, and India and tech and services and manufacturing. Last year, US-China trade was the highest. It's about 535 billion. In spite of the COVID, disruptions in supply chain and trade being step up from India to replace China with some of the trade policies. Sridhar, I want to know now, what can we do to really push, making India maybe the top 4 trade partners of US and a very strategic trade partner in this side of the world. What sort of agenda the Indian diaspora and the Indian government needs to set up with Biden to really convince to continue the embargo on Chinese trade and really push other trade partners forward?
India, if I'm correct, I always look at it from the US side. India, if I'm correct, focuses most recently, I think there was a statement issued by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, which is that India has been influential in steering United States away from China as a strategic player, raising a raft of issues, including the Tibetan and the Himalayan skirmishes, and then unwarranted extending itself into South China and in Indian Ocean is a Quad. India responded by saying, US-China is a US-China matter. India has nothing to do with it. And I think that's generally the policy. US is a strategic partner of India. US stands by all its strategic partners, be it Taiwan, when China tried to kind of bulldoze and harass, so they supported. It said it was to support Philippines, so because US-Philippines have a dialogue. It was to support Korea, so same thing. Mike Pompeo has repeatedly come and said, look, the BEX agreement, bilateral exchange communication services agreement that it signed, is basically to give strategic access because China is occupying India and threatening. Maybe even Indian politicians don't say it, but United States came and said, and we stand with India. Mike Pompeo has said, and President Trump has said that part. China doesn't, so therefore that's a US-India kind of strategic partnership and the mutual respect that the two nations have. So India will always steer, and same with US, traditionally bilateral in terms of how they form relationships and how they build it. They form a regional cooperation only when you have a shared agenda amongst nations that is part of the region. If you have 7 countries in the region, if 6 countries agree or 5 countries agree, then that occurs. So you will not find any change in the India-US dialogue on an ongoing basis. And I think Indians today are very different to what India was, 10 years ago, right? It's a very strong economy, very strong economy. It is now a leading player in a number of segments, verticals from mobile to solar to now pharma to major infrastructure effort is underway. No need to talk about IT, where you all come from. India is a big provider of IT services to Europe. So I think India is also a major now exporter of defense under a joint partnership from United States, as with France and so on. So I think to me, it's the geopolitics which will shape the Indo-US in terms of agreements and disagreements, not just India-US in its own right.
Let's move on to the tech part of it now. You see, India banned a lot of Chinese apps and products due to political reasons. And obviously, Trump and administration also endorsed and also thought of even banning some of those apps, and including Huawei, whatever you. Then comes this whole WhatsApp privacy issue and the Indian government requesting WhatsApp to work on the privacy issue and be India specific. Do you think the Biden administration will support Chinese and force India to open up these apps again in Indian soil, or just because India had to hit back on one of their tech companies, there's going to be some sort of a retaliation? They're going to go and play the politics and say, okay, you open up Chinese and blah, blah, blah. And this becomes another trade war on tech and tech products coming in the future.
Look, I think that as a US, United States, Indian American, I would like to see India assert its right. Okay. Same as a US with a conservative kind of a mindset and a free market mindset. I would like to see a tech platform is a tech platform. I think that's where it begins and ends. One of the biggest challenges is not geopolitics. One of the biggest challenges the world faces in the next 3 to 5 years is the unfortunate collaboration of tech, media, and the so-called, liberal jihadi kind of networks. The influence is unfairly prejudiced or biased towards one side of the fence. That you have seen by way of observations. Okay. They have not dared to shut down Modi, but they have dared to shut down a president of the most powerful nation in the world from Twitter, right? Trump. Okay. But 88 million followers. Okay. So to me, when I look at India, when you look at India, India is the home to the largest WhatsApp users. India is home to one of the large Twitter users. India is home to the second largest mobile users. India is also home to a very large diaspora of tech developers. So in that context, India has all the power and the might and the right economic, political, and a strategic context to shape its narrative, not to be undermined. So the most recent changes that are coming in and the discussions that have happened between the Indian communications and corporate or law ministry with the tech platforms and the revolving journey with the tech platforms is the right course, which is to say, you may have policies elsewhere. You want to do business with us, then you have to do business the way that we set down the policies, which is as per our democratic constitution. Well, are you not doing that in China? So please try to have, otherwise China will shut you down. You're banned in China because you can't follow the Chinese policies. We're not going to ban you, but we're going to ask you whether you comply. If you don't comply, then we're not. Unfortunately, in the United States, we have the 230 Amendment, which basically, and then we have the First Amendment. The 230 Amendment gives the immunity from any liability that these companies can be subjected to for their actions. So that's why they are behaving like intermediaries. So the point that I'm trying to make is that India has to determine its course. US absorbing these applications does not mean India will follow the same. India followed because there was political and military threat from Chinese threatening the sovereignty of India. There was also lots of activism within. I think they arrested few people, 3, 4, 5 people, in India. So therefore, I think India's decisions stand, vindicated on the basis of what it believes it's beneficial, or whether it is not a political or military threat to the sovereignty of the nation. So I will not see, just because United States says I'm lifting the ban, India lifting the ban. No, there's no way. I don't see that. Unless China says, I'm going to withdraw from all boundaries. There's no border. India, you take back your land. We have our land. You don't interfere with us. We don't interfere with you. That's very unlikely. China never leaves. Never leaves. It only threatens more and more. It is just the policy of the communist policies of the Chinese, who think they own the whole earth. All they have to see is go back and look what they were, 70, 100 years ago to where they are today. So to me, I think India asserting its position is the right position, and I believe India will continue to.
Moving on from here to cyber terrorism and terrorism, would love to understand how are things going to shape up? Issue on cyber terrorism and terrorism. Obviously, India and US are very much aligned, and the Trump administration was very much aligned on international terrorism and cyber terrorism. Do you think these policies would continue in the Biden era, and would India and US invest further in enhancing the tech and everything around the cyber terrorism and come up with a much more safer world in the next 4 years of this administration?
It's a great question. I know there was a collaboration mooted to ban Huawei and the 5G to be developed by a consortium of Japan, France, Britain, India, United States, and many other countries were to join, which moved away from the Huawei. And India was at one of the forefront of that development. And when the change of administration occurred, because of some policy issues that could prop up, Japan immediately helped India with some of the software, because India was dismantling the Huawei infrastructure. So therefore, on that Huawei 5G AI side, I think India and Japan and Britain and France and maybe Germany, to some extent, United States will collaborate. But it remains to be seen how strong the US relationship in this specific domain as it relates to mitigating cyber attacks and cyber terrorism and This is on the technology development side. In terms of knowledge and information sharing, I think that probably would kind of continue. Okay. Having said that, China and Russia are considered to be a little more advanced on the cyber relative to United States or India. Okay, that's just a fact which the security experts on all sides kind of acknowledge, right? So
Correct.
cyber terrorism, there would be a collaboration. On the terrorism side, I think this is where this India, Pakistan, and US, Pakistan, and issues could prop up, because you have US, Pakistan, China, Pakistan, you have Iran, Pakistan, you have now Turkey, Pakistan. So how this, and then the good news here is the India, West Asia. West Asian nations are, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, and all these types of people, right? So the story is how this will shape up is West Asia. I think India has got both on the investment side as well as on the security side, well tied up. On the deal, that $35 billion deal that was, or $35 billion deal that was signed by the UAE on the latest F-35s is now is what you call as a hold, because Biden administration is reassessing all the export commitments on the military technology, right? I mean, what they're going to do, we don't know. So on the terrorism side, you talked about some of these 20 people. Remember, there's also a lot of Pakistani Americans who are part of the Biden administration in very key and strategic positions, just as these Indian Americans are. So therefore, I'm not very optimistic on the terrorism side under the present Biden administration. The classic example is what happened on 26th November during that specific phase, right? So I'm not kind of so positive. So it is going to be a simmering issue, but India will deal with it. We also have the China-Pakistan digital belt road. We also have the China-Pakistan, the new road that they're trying to lay from.
That's a little bit on the back burner at this point in time.
Yeah,
the Chinese having kind of pulled back, and so there's
good. So I think that to answer your question, I think we're cyber. I think there would be on the terrorism side. We need to see.
Excellent. My son is studying in US. He just got a job, and I don't know what's going to happen in future when Trump had put visa bans and everything on students getting visas for students and whatnot, and then suddenly this whole simmering issue of H-1B visas and tech visa green card issues for the techies, Indian techies working in the US, pursuing the American dream. What do you think would happen now on the immigration issue? I'm more worried as a father. Do I need to call back my son after he finishes his whatever quota of his years in the US, or does he pursue an American dream?
Right. Okay, I think I'll give you two answers for this. Okay. The first answer that I would give you is United States is going to decriminalize illegal border crossing. Okay. Decriminalize. So in other words, what they're saying is, if you happen to be in the border and if you come across the border as illegal, we're not going to treat you as a criminal, and we're going to somehow figure out as to how to harmonize you. Okay. So there is a completely diametrically opposite policy, which is opposed by Customs and Border Patrol, called CBP, right? The second is called as open borders, so which is effectively to say, we need to have much more open borders. There is a conciliatory policy on asylum seekers. There's going to be an officer in charge. So to answer your question, if your son were to kind of have a backpack and be in the Mexican border and figure out a way to cross, is come into United States and then wait for 5-year, 8-year, 10-year normalization process. So we have opened the world. Just today, the news is that We have to harmonize all these 12 million illegal people and integrate them into the society. We got to find a way. So it's good news for you on that front. He's already in, so he's already in.
Better not go for the green card process, which takes, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years in some of the places. Better to just cross the border and enter illegally.
Yeah, easy. Not like us, people came 40, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, go through TOEFL and GRE1 and GRE2 and recommendation letters and get the parents to borrow money and and make your way and study and get scores and do 2 masters and then find a job and then go through the normalization. You just stand in the border, you come across, you find a way, you're in. You have the basic skills and talent, you can work. It's a new America that we are creating here. Okay, so it's much easier under the Biden, under this new progressive democratic policies that are likely to come in. Now, in terms of the future, I don't know what the Indians when I look at the next 20 years, 34% of the global GDP comes from Asia today. If I take 2030, close to 40% of GDP, if I take 2030, it's 40%, 2040, it's about 44%. By the time we get to 2050, which is not too far, or even you take next 10, 15 years, Asian GDP will contribute 54 to 56% of the world GDP. So the economic balance has shifted. Vietnam is China 2 on manufacturing. Taiwan is China 1B in terms of its overall industrial electronic semiconductor capabilities. So therefore, when you look at Asia as the most dynamic, and if you take a look at India relative to, we were, going back to 97, 98, we were inviting COBOL programmers and,
Y2K,
autocoder programmers, assembler to fix our IT systems. Okay, the world has changed today. I don't even know many technologies that kind of drive these new social and collaborative and AI and robotics and all these kinds of, wham bam stuff. So India is kind of evolving there. So I see a bright future. It's about a global dream with an Eastern mindset. And so East is where the future is. By the time we get to 2050, United States GDP as a relative global share from 27% is going to come down to about 14%. Well, that tells you where the world is heading, which is the reason why the whole economic, trade, and security strategy of Modi is act east and look east, which aligns with Japan, which aligns with Vietnam, which aligns with Singapore, to some extent, which also aligns with West Asian nations. So I think that would be my answer to you, KK.
Excellent, Sridhar. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but I'm really glad to have got your mind and your thoughts on what's going to happen. It's been really enlightening for us and the audience here, what's really going to pan out. And at least some of our audiences have gained hearing from you what going to happen next, or what are the possibilities on the India-US front. I'd like to thank you for being part of the show. Before I just wrap up,